My name is Timon, and I'm a teacher from the Netherlands. And I am really intrigued by your work because my son is in one of these project classes who are really experimenting with your theory of intelligence. So that's
Hmm.
why I was really interested in interviewing you.
Okay.
So before we start the interview, do you have any questions for me?
I don't know. Let's see. Any thoughts about how we can get rid of Trump? That would be helpful.
Well, at least it is always an interesting topic when I'm in it in my classroom or amongst teachers. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's also one of my questions. So let's start off with this question. I mean, um, we all witness Trump's foreign policy and what he's doing with North Korea and China, but we do not really have an insight in his educational policy. So, how would you describe the current state of education in the United States?
Well, first of all, with regard to so-called President Trump, I don't think he has policies. He seems to go by whim. He doesn't read. He said that. He doesn't seem to pay attention to any media except fawning media. So I can't talk about his policies because I don't really think he has any, other than getting himself rich and reelected. In terms of the current state of education in the United States, uh, it's so mixed. It's a big country. It has many different pieces. So like schooling in Massachusetts, which is a northeastern state, would be very different on average from schooling in Oklahoma or Mississippi. Um, so generally, it's hard to say. I think that a common feature of all the education is a huge over reliance on standardized tests because that's now become federally mandated, whereas in the United States, most of the educational policies are state mandated. Um, and the emphasis on testing, I think, is most unfortunate and actually relates to the beginning of our conversation. And that is what it has done is produced a generation of leaders who are academically reasonably smart. Many of the members of Congress, many of the potential presidential candidates attended Ivy League or at least highly prestigious schools, but they're totally ill equipped for leadership positions because they can't translate their smarts into any meaningful, coherent uh, policy that helps the people they're supposed to lead. The problem with standardized tests is they emphasize skills that uh, get you ahead in school, but that are largely irrelevant uh, and sometimes counterproductive for success in life. Being good at solving multiple choice test problems, for example, is that a skill we want to reward kids for when in real life you never get multiple choices? No one ever tells you
That's
exactly
true.
what the problem is.
Yeah.
It often the problems, if you figure them out, are ill-defined, and more often than not, our leaders are solving the wrong problems. That's been glaringly clear with Trump. So the emphasis on standardized tests is very bad because the kids who do well on them are the kids who get into prestigious colleges. Those are the kids who are educated to be leaders, but they're not always the right kids, and the way they're educated places so much emphasis on abilities and knowledge that are irrelevant to future success that we end up with leaders who are hacks or worse, are just dipping for themselves.
I read a book from Noam Chomsky. It's called Chomsky on Miseducation, and he says that some people really benefit from the system because they want students to learn the wrong things because they want to remain in power. What he says is some people really um, want education to fail because of their own good. So how do you what do you think of that statement?
I don't think, in my experience, Chomsky tends to be a radical, of course. I don't think it's necessarily that they want them to fail. I think it's a systemic problem. I don't think it's ha ha ha. Let's have our kids
Mm.
fail. Rather, once any system is in place, it's very hard to dislodge because the people who benefited from it think, well, hell, if I'm rich or I'm popular or I'm a CEO or I'm powerful, whatever system produced me must be pretty good because I'm really hot stuff. And the system had the good sense to put me into a position of being rich or powerful. So people tend to look for others like themselves. And that was true in the past when it was the way you were promoted was mostly by socioeconomic status, which it still is. And it's true today. Moreover, their children tend to be like them because they brought them up. So they bring them up to be like them, which is book smart,
Mm-hmm.
pretty egocentric, today, in many cases, to the point of being narcissistic. And so we end up with a new generation like the old generation because not only do they want to retain their power, but they want that power to go to their kids, not someone else's,
Yeah,
who they know don't have nearly the competence of their own wonderful children. Every parent thinks their kids are wonderful. I do, don't you?
I do. I certainly do. So the standardized testing has done a lot of harm. Did it all start with the Nation at Risk report back in the 80s? When did it happen? When did it start?
No, it goes back a long time before that. In at least in our country, I don't know about the Netherlands, but here tests like the SAT and the ACT are went back to the early 1900s. The extension to elementary, secondary school. Uh, I was taking IQ tests when I was growing up, and you can tell by my hair, although I'm really 35, I got early
Of
white hair
course.
now. In the 1950s, when I was growing up, they were giving IQ tests every year or two, group IQ tests. And now they don't call them IQ tests, they call them mastery tests or SATs or ACTs, but they all measure general intelligence plus some specific knowledge. So I would date it quite a bit earlier than that. What changed in the 1960s, I think, was a shift from it's enough to just have rich, white Protestant parents to you also have to have good test scores. But in large part, it was the same people. It just gave it a meritocratic veneer that laundered the perpetuation of what had come to be the socioeconomic upper class. So before, you can, well, I'm rich. Well, someone in the 60s says, so what? Well, my kid has good SAT scores. Well, now it's okay. When in fact, parents who have resources can devote those resources to getting their kids good test scores. And kids who grow up in families with money don't have to develop the creative and practical skills to survive in an inner city or on a farm. They have the luxury of developing abstract analytical skills in an academic knowledge base. Kids who grow up in the lower socioeconomic status homes, uh, they don't have that advantage. So uh, they have to develop creative and practical skills simply in order to survive. To get to school safely, to learn how to
Yeah.
handle the animals,
Yeah.
to learn how not to fall victim to drug dealers on the streets. So often the kids who are more challenged develop skills that are really relevant for life. But
Yeah.
then we have this overlay of a system that benefits the rich kids for the most
Yeah,
part.
in one of your talks I saw on YouTube, you refer to Eskimo kids who are really intelligent in navigating big
Hmm.
open wide spaces, and maybe they don't do as well on SAT scores tests, but they know how to navigate, and that's a skill that really matters for them in their environment.
Yeah,
So
what we found in that study with Eskimo kids, Yupik children, is that they would. The finding you mentioned is that they could travel long distances on a dog sled in the frozen open tundra. If their teachers tried to do that, the teachers would die because
yeah,
they'd have no clue how to navigate these open spaces. But the schools don't capitalize on the kids' strengths. And that's true of schools in general, at least in our country, that these kids have skills, but the schools don't capitalize on them. So many minority group kids are made to feel inferior, they're treated like they're inferior, and then they're taught in ways that produce that result. And then through affirmative action, they sometimes go to more prestigious schools, but they've been ill prepared
yeah.
for the environment. And that actually reinforces the stereotype that these kids can't compete with
Yeah.
the kids from the upper class
It,
environment.
it
Well, if you
all
grow up for 18 years in that kind of environment, you don't.
Yeah, it always reminds me of that picture of the cartoon of all these animals standing in front of a tree: a fish, an elephant, a monkey, and they all have to climb the tree in order to get into
Right. Yeah, it's a
university,
great
for
cartoon.
example. And that's
Yes.
I think that that's a nice description of visual description of what you are paying attention to. So one of the goals of this interview is to gain best practices, to gain tips, to see how we can use your theories in our educational system in the Netherlands. So let's start by defining your theory, and I'm really interested in your theory of intelligence in this case. You've done more theories: theory of hate, theory of love, but in this case, your theory of intelligence. So how would you
Yeah.
explain it to my viewers and readers?
Yeah. Well, the basic idea is that we tend typically to look at the smart kids as ones who get good grades in school and do well on tests. And so we typically define smart as high IQ or high school achieving or high general intelligence. Uh, I have a concept I call successful intelligence, which is different. And successful intelligence is basically your ability to figure out what you want from your life, to work to the best of your ability to get whatever it is you want to do in your life. And then as your life throws you hardballs, to keep redirecting yourself and sometimes changing your goals. But it's basically about your navigation through life and your ability to navigate life's challenges rather than scores on a test. I've argued that people who are good at navigating their lives are people who, for one thing, figure out where their strengths are. What am I good at? Where can I make a difference? How can I have an impact at some level? They figure out what their strengths are, they make the most of those strengths. And the things they don't do well, their weaknesses, they either correct so that they're good enough, or they compensate for the weaknesses. They make it so that they're good enough to get by having help, having other people help them, or make those things unimportant for their lives. And they capitalize on strengths and compensate for or correct for weaknesses through a combination of creative skills in coming up with novel and useful ideas, analytical skills in ascertaining which of their ideas are good ideas, because even the most creative people often have bad ideas, practical skills or common sense in implementing their ideas and being able to make things work, and in being able to persuade other people of the value of their ideas, and wisdom based skills, which are using their knowledge and skills for a common good, doing something that's not just to benefit them, but to benefit others, the common good, what's good for everyone. And so when I write about teaching, and I've written with co-authors a few books like Teaching for Successful Intelligence, right? Teaching for Wisdom,
Yeah.
Intelligence, Creativity, and Success. The emphasis is on how you teach in ways to promote creativity, analytical skills, practical skills, and wisdom-based skills. And my argument has been that schools very much emphasize memory and analysis. And those are good things. You need knowledge, of course. To think, you need knowledge to think about. You need analytical skills to analyze things. But in the absence of teaching for creativity, common sense, and wisdom, we develop students who are good book learners, but who can't necessarily effectively and pro-socially apply their skills to life.
And you talk about creativity, practical skills, analytical skills, and wisdom came in later, I guess. Huh?
Right.
You added it later. So it's about applying all the skills for the common good. So when is a child old enough to apply those skills for the common good? When is a child ready? Because it's easier to assess creativity, practical skills especially, but how do you assess wisdom when you talk about kids?
Well, none of these things are so easy to assess. One of the reasons that we're sort of stuck with so many assessments of memory and analysis is that they're easy to measure. How old do kids have to be? Well, as you mentioned, we have triplets who are 7. You teach kids really when they're in the early single digits. For example, this morning, Sammy sat down to play some notes on the piano. And I said, Sammy, Mom and the girls are sleeping, so don't play the piano. Now, that's a small scale example, but it happened today. He's 7. And those things happen every day, multiple times a day, that you, as a parent, should be working with your child, not only what do you want to do, but how is this going to impact the people around you in as small an example as other people are sleeping or other people are busy. So teaching care and concern for other people should start when kids are, infants and toddlers, really, certainly toddlers. In terms of how you assess it, I should say one thing before I answer the question, and that is I think a problem with schooling today, at least in the United States, I can't speak for the Netherlands, is that assessment too much drives curriculum. So we assess things that are easy to assess, and then we end up teaching things that are easy to assess rather than skills kids need to learn. I might add that I just wrote a paper for a book I'm editing with Judith Gluck and Howard Nussbaum on applying wisdom to everyday life. And I did an analysis of U.S. reading textbooks in 1900, in the 1950s, and currently. And it's really interesting what I did for the same length of school year. I looked at the number of wisdom-based lessons they had. And in 1900, it was really large. In 1950, it was medium. And in the current text, it's very small. And that's an example of how tests have driven teaching for wisdom out of the curriculum. So it's not just my opinion.
Is it tests or culture? It could be culture as well, right?
Yeah, I think it is probably culture. I think that, look, 40% of this country supports a guy who is likely to be indicted as president, who it looks like has engaged in multiple examples of criminal activity, and they don't care. He Trump joked when he was running for president that if he shot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue, his supporters wouldn't care, and people took it as a throwaway line. But you know what? He was right. Uh, Look at the people who supported Hitler, who later claimed, "Well, I didn't know anything was going on," or
Yeah.
Mussolini, or Stalin. So things have not gotten better in many respects. In the new generation, after the post-war generation, we're starting over and in a worse spot than we were, much worse than right after the wars. In terms of how you assess it, what we do is we give examples of things like interpersonal conflicts. Some people are having a conflict, or two people are having a conflict. How might they resolve it so that they both come out feeling like it was fair? Or we have interorganizational conflicts or international conflicts, or on the one of the college applications, we ask, how might you use your knowledge and skills later in life to achieve some kind of common good? Uh, but we tend to assess it through social problems involving human values.
All hypothetical problems. It's
Yeah,
never a practical.
hypothetical. And the important thing is that when you score, you don't score for their solution, like is their solution right or wrong, because there is no right or wrong. Rather, you score for the wisdom they use process wise. In other words, in their thinking, are they trying to achieve a common good by balancing their own with others with larger interests over the long as well as the short term through the infusion of positive ethical values? So it's the processes of thinking that are wise, not one outcome or another.
What I just finished, I just did an interview with E.D. Hirsch. Maybe you know his work.
Yeah,
He
sure.
wrote a book, What Every American Needs to Know, and he's
Right.
really an advocate of a fixed curriculum. With not to, what he says, there's no such thing as creativity or critical thinking skills. It's all domain specific. So I'm really curious about, is there such a thing as creativity which you can apply in every subject without knowing a specific domain? Is there such a thing?
Well, I'm glad he has no expertise in the field, I guess, because it sounds like he hasn't read anything. Creativity is partly domain specific. Sure. You can't be a great musician without knowing music, and you can't be a great scientist without knowing science. So, to that extent, of course, he's right, and I would totally agree. But what he misses, and what a lot of people miss, who don't, I think, who don't study creativity, or even some people who do, is that creativity is largely an attitude toward a life. It's not some kind of knowledge which you're going to get by a Hirsch system of memorizing a lot of stuff. In fact, that tends to crowd out creativity. And you're not going to get it by, studying something for 50 years. What gets it for you is the attitude that creativity is largely, at least in my own triangular theory of creativity, it's about three things. It's defying the crowd, it's being willing to stand up to people who are going to oppose you. It's like when everyone is going out in the Republican Party today, there's almost zero creativity. They're too friggin' afraid to oppose Trump. And that's what creativity is about. It's that being creative is scary. And most people are cowards. What else is new? So you have to be willing to defy the crowd. And politicians sucking up for votes generally aren't willing to do that. Some are, but certainly not in the Republic. John McCain was it can be done. John McCain was like that. So you have to be willing to defy the crowd. You have to be, and it doesn't have to be at the political level. It can be in terms of the way you dress or the way you think. And it's not just defying the crowd, it's defying the crowd in a way that's not only novel, but useful, that's high in quality, that's effective in some way. You have to be willing to defy yourself. and not get, well, I've always believed this, so I'm going to believe it forever because that's the way I was brought up. And I just won't let this go. I mean, sometimes it means saying, I was, the way I thought wasn't so good, or it was good for that time, but it's not good for this time. I have to evolve. And some people just can't evolve. They're still pushing the same ideas when they're 70 that they did when they're 30. And you have to be willing to defy the zeitgeist or the worldview, the stuff that you're not even aware you believe. You have to challenge beliefs you have that you don't know you have about the way things should work.
But
An example in this country would be our bicameral legislature. Having a House of Representatives and a Senate for most of the history of the country worked. It's not working now. It's essentially most of the land area in this country is rural. And so you're giving people who vote in Wyoming many times the power per vote of someone who lives in New York or California. And that doesn't work so well anymore because the population centers, at least now, are ideologically so different from the rural areas. So sometimes it's defying the zeitgeist that just because we've done something for 1,000 years or 100 years or 50 years doesn't mean we have to keep doing it.
Well, that's your definition. You say it's defying the zeitgeist. If I would look the term up in Webster's dictionary, would it provide me with the same explanation of creativity? There must be so many definitions, and that makes it.
There are a lot of definitions of creativity. What I presented is my own view of creativity, but I think there are some things that are common to a lot of definitions. And again, I think they're attitudinal. There are things like you take a problem and you're willing to redefine it, to look at it a different way. You're willing to take intellectual risks. You're willing to overcome obstacles because if you're creative, you're always going to have people coming up against you. And are you willing to fight for your beliefs? Not taking your ideas too seriously, because if you take your ideas too seriously, you get stuck on them. And then you write a book about knowledge in 1960 and you're still saying the same thing in 2018 or something. So I think the attitudes, people would generally agree. You have to be willing to sell your ideas. Creative ideas don't sell themselves. You have to work hard to persuade people to listen to you. And those are not genetic predispositions. They're not learned by stuffing your head with textbook knowledge. They're attitudes toward your life.
Well, the reason E.D. Hirsch, was so critical about it is because it caused, in his opinion, in his view, a lot of inequity. Because since you need knowledge in order to develop creativity and problem-solving skills, there was a period in American education, he told me, that emphasized more on skills than knowledge. So
Right.
especially the people who came from poor backgrounds, Afro-American people who didn't have the means and the resources to fill the gap, the knowledge gap, from by using the knowledge of their parents because they were uneducated as well. The system was emphasizing on skills, but he says you can't. It's useless to.
Right. That was a hot issue in the 1960s. 60 years ago, that was a really big deal. I was in school then, and I totally agree with him. When I was in school, they had what they called the new math. It was SMSG math, the new biology, BSCS biology, the new physics, PSSC physics, new chemistry, chem study chemistry. And they were trying to teach concepts in the absence of knowledge. By the 1970s, the late 70s, it was clear it wasn't working. Kids weren't learning because you can't think without something to think with. As I said earlier in the interview, you need knowledge to think. But what happens, and it's Hegelian, is we go from one extreme to another. So if you look back to early in the 20th century, it was all stuffing kids' heads with facts. And then we go to it's all skills, and then then we make the mistake, which I think he's making. Whoa, we were right before. Let's go back to all knowledge. No, the point was you need both. You need to integrate them, but knowledge without thinking skills is useless. How many psychologists make a mess of their lives? How many people who study economics can handle their own family budgets? How many people who study political science make good politicians? What you end up with is people who have a lot of book knowledge and they can't apply it. It's just sitting in their heads. So what I have argued is, yes, knowledge is important for all of these skills, creative, analytical, practical, and wisdom. But if that's all you have, what you end up with is someone who's good at taking multiple choice tests, but is educated in the most limited sense of, of knowing stuff. If you look at the top people in any field, psychology, chemistry, physics, they're not necessarily the people who got straight A's in their early courses. I wrote about this in early and mid 80s, that I wrote about a woman I called Alice, who was extremely good at taking tests. She was very knowledgeable, and she had terrific analytical skills and sky-high test scores, and she got into our graduate program at Yale, and she did really well for a year, which is when she was taking courses. But when it came to coming up with her own ideas, there was nothing there. And it's not because she wasn't born with the right genes. It's because our schools reinforced this kind of limited, memorize a lot of stuff and spit it back on the test. So she never had any incentive, any rewards for developing creative, practical, or wisdom-based skills. So I agree that you need knowledge to think, but knowledge is necessary but not sufficient for any kind of true expertise.
No, not sufficient, but knowledge precedes skills. That's the story.
Right. Well, better you learn them together.
Yeah.
And that is, as you're learning the knowledge, you learn how to use it. It's a mistake in science, for example, to say knowledge precedes skills, because then you teach kids a lot of stuff. And when you teach them, they're not only learning knowledge, they're learning, much more importantly, how to think in that discipline. And if they're not learning how to think in that discipline, or they're learning how wrongly to think, then they're not going to be much good later on. A mistake we make when we take kids for graduate schools is often they're kids who were very good at acquiring facts, but everyone will say, well, they'll be scientists later on. But by the time they become scientists, they're ingrained in not knowing how to think scientifically. We just did some studies. They were published at the end of 2017, where we gave tests of scientific reasoning and compared scores among the tests of scientific reasoning to scores on SATs and ACTs, which are standardized tests used to measure academic preparation in the United States. And at least at Cornell, the correlations were 0 to negative. So the kids who are good at this kind of acquiring knowledge and then spinning it back on multiple choice are not the same as the ones who will be really good scientists. Similarly, someone could be very good in school math, but not be able creatively to generate proofs. Or they could be good in school physics, but not be able to generate either theories or experiments in physics. And the same would be true in any field, literature, history, that there's a difference between the people who are good at spitting the stuff back and the ones who are going to be creative contributors to the field.
Well, before we go into the classroom practice and your theory, how do you look at PISA rankings? Because it's comparing countries, language, arithmetic. Are they measuring the right things according to you?
PISA, yeah. Well, those are. I actually looked at some data from PISA, and those are more tests of G-based skills. I mean, I think it's
intelligence. You mean?
Show that some kids have more knowledge and more ability to analyze the knowledge than others. Has some use. but that's not going to tell you where the kids are going to be creative, practical, or wise. So we're going to make a positive, meaningful, and enduring difference to the world. And I wish we would stop emphasizing so much who's a good student and emphasize more who's going to change the world. Because if we don't do something soon, we're in friggin' trouble. I mean, like, where is the education establishment in recognizing that we have serious problems like climate change, increasing income disparities? People are so poor that even if they work full time, they can't support their families. We have violence, we have terrorism, and we're worried about PISA. Yeah, right. I mean, if the world has a nuclear war, peace is not going to matter. If people die from climate change, peace is not going to matter. None of this stuff is going to matter. But this is what I mean about defying the zeitgeist. And then we have these people in the education establishment who just can't imagine education being anything beside the way it is, and it's not working. Look at Poland. Look at Hungary. Look at the United States. Look at Venezuela. Look at Brazil. Look at Mexico. Country after country voting in populist, I won't call them proto-fascists, but people who are at best illiberal, who want to concentrate power in their own hands. So if that's the best we can do, then we're screwing up. Look at Britain with the mess they created with Brexit, and they mess it up more every day. And so this is a worldwide phenomenon, and we're worried about PISA.
Well, my theory is that's the best way for a Secretary of State to prove their educational policy is effective. I think that's the only useful tool. I can't find any other practical use in comparing countries anyway.
Yeah.
So, about 21st century skills, I'm really curious about what do you think about 21st century skills? They have some of the same terminology like critical thinking, creative thinking, but it's more. It's also digital skills. Do you know the concept?
Yeah, I think 21st century skills are important if we identify the right ones. For example, information retrieval and analysis is very important. There's less need today to know a lot of facts that you can look up, but it depends on what 21st century skills you're talking about, because some of those are technical skills, and technical skills change very quickly. So the question you always have to ask with technical skills is not whether they're relevant to the beginning of the 21st century, but are they going to be relevant to the middle of the 21st century when these kids grow up?
Well, I always refer to P21, Partnership for 21st Century Skills, and they defined worldwide standards for 21st century skills. Do you know the organization, P21?
No.
Okay, all right. Well, let's move to classroom practice, because my viewers and readers are mainly teachers and policymakers. So, I'm a teacher, and you have a theory of intelligence, which may give students opportunities to develop themselves in different ways than just analytical skills. So where do you start as a teacher? What can I do as a teacher tomorrow with your theory?
Right. What you can do tomorrow, or I guess it's too late for today. I think it's 8:40 in the evening there, and you probably don't have any late night classes.
No.
But if you want to, say, develop creativity, what you do is you give students activities where they do things like create something, invent something, explore something, imagine something, suppose, hypothesize, things where they basically create, where they think divergently, not just in terms of trivial stuff, but in terms of real world content. So create, invent, explore, imagine, suppose. You do things like that. And you emphasize the importance of creative attitudes, like taking intellectual risks, overcoming obstacles, redefining problems, having a sense of humor about yourself and other people, believing in yourself even if people come out against you. To develop analytical skills, you do things like analyze, judge, compare and contrast, evaluate, critique. Um, they're skills where you look at data or you look at ideas and you judge them or you analyze them. So that might be writing a book review or an analysis of a musical piece or an analysis of an artwork or an analysis of a political theory. To develop practical skills, you have kids do things like put something into practice, use an idea in your everyday life, persuade somebody of some idea that you have, execute something, have a plan for taking an idea and making it work. With practical, the idea is to show how you. When I teach my courses, they're very practical. So this past semester, I taught a course on creativity and a course on leadership, and especially in the course on leadership, the emphasis was on how can you use this information to become a leader. And wisdom, when you teach for wisdom, you're asking your students to think about how can I take these ideas and apply them to a common good. Like, think about something like slavery in the history of the United States, or colonialism, or companies that pollute the environment. They're advantage to some people. People are making money by polluting the environment. How about our climate change? How about when you think about carbon emissions and their effect not only on all of present constituencies, on your children and your grandchildren? So that's how you do it. It's not that impossible. I think the reason teachers don't do it as much is that they're not trained and it's not on the test. But it's nothing secret.
That's what I was saying, because the SATs and the ACTs are not going to change. It's still going to be the same setup, as well as in the Netherlands. So we can do all these practical things, but in the end, we want a diploma and we need to pass our really analytical tests. So why would we do it? Why?
Well, I think a good reason is that what we're doing now is not sustainable. And that may sound like my opinion, but as I said, if you look at the number of countries that are electing autocrats or proto-autocrats, including in Europe, Czech Republic, Hungary, yes, Poland, Russia in Europe, that's not so good. The problem, every report on climate change suggests that we have disaster ahead of us. And at least in this country, we already see the results with huge hurricanes, higher temperatures. I mean, it's just not sustainable. If you look at income disparity, when I grew up in Maplewood, New Jersey, it was mostly middle class. And there were some rich people and some poor people. But those kinds of communities are becoming more and more rare. You're more getting enclaves of very rich people. Oh, there are small portions of the middle class that moved up and large portions that moved down. And and that's what got people like Trump elected. Angry, bitter people saying, I don't deserve what I'm getting. And they're right. They don't. They've been ignored by a system.
Is it all due to a poor schooling system? Did you do any research? How Trump started in elite schools, but how about Romania? How about Venezuela? Is it all due to what I mean? If these people were taught creatively, analytical, and wisdom-based, would the world have been different?
I don't know what would have happened, but I would hope that sometimes that what you're doing now doesn't work, and you never can have assurance that anything you do differently will work, no doubt about it. That only God knows. But we know that what we're doing now isn't working. And if try to give me the names of some wise political leaders today.
That's difficult. But
Tell
do
me.
do you
You
have
tell
a
me.
test group of people who were taught about wisdom and people who weren't? And did you compare those two groups?
No, I don't really know of any schools at the present that have. There may well be. I'm not an expert on what every school is doing, but I'm far from it. I'm a, you know, uh, slightly known academic. I don't know if schools are doing this. If I knew about a school that was doing it, I would love to do the study. But I think at least the public schools are so enchained by the tests that it's unlikely to happen in a public school. So if there were any, at least in this country, it would be almost certainly in private schools or charter schools.
Do you have a foundation like Hirsch has the Core Knowledge Foundation and initiatives such as that to promote these ideas? What kind of initiatives are there in the United States to promote your theory?
I don't know. One of the reasons I feel like when I started out at 25, I started as assistant professor. I was 25 years old. I was full of optimism. Now I'm a bit older. I just turned 69 to be exact, a couple of days ago. And, I think as an academic, I'm not going to get anything done. I tried doing administration for 8 years, and I think I had some success as a two universities for a while, Tufts and Oklahoma State. And so I thought through administration, I could make a difference. And I
Yes.
think I made some, at least in those two places. But I'm thinking that for what future I have left, at 69, what I'd like to do is create a website for ideas about successful intelligence and see whether I can have more luck through a website at promoting some of the ideas, because just doing it through books and journal articles, not much changes. And I don't know if the website will work. And it may be that I'm going to just fail in that regard. And then it's up to my kids and my students and your kids and your students to make the difference.
Well,
As
I
far
think I think
I
it's
had an advisor, Endel Toving, as an undergraduate. He said to me, Bob, you're underestimating how hard it is to change things. And
yeah.
he was right.
Well, you wrote me in an email. The frustration of my life is that in 40 years I've reached exactly nothing. Well, that's a big frustration after 40 years. Um, I think what really intrigues me is that America is really a breeding ground for educational theories, for psychological theories. The whole world is watching to the United States when it comes to the psychological world and when it comes to the educational world. But still, education in the United States is really poor, I suppose. When I talk to professors like Andy Hargreaves, Michael Fulham, Robert Mazzano, they all come to the same conclusion. How is it possible that you have so many bright minds in the United States, but still your educational system isn't optimal?
Unwillingness to defy the zeitgeist, which I talked about earlier. The system is very entrenched. And, I had hoped there would be a chance under President Obama for things to change. And then he appointed Arne Duncan as Secretary of Education,
Yes.
who I found tremendously disappointing. Uh, I felt that he was very conventional, very into tests, had very few really creative ideas. He had lots of ideas about how to promote the existing system, but none that I could discern about actually improving education other than having a bunch of competitions to do the same old that
Yeah.
we've always been doing. So there was a chance, but Obama blew it. I mean,
Yeah,
it
well,
wasn't perfect.
Professor Richard Ryan, he wrote the self-determination theory. He told me the race to the top policy was no child left behind on steroids. He said
It was
it
insane
was
stuff.
even worse.
Yeah.
And people adore Obama in the Netherlands, but again, we don't know what's happening in the field of education.
Yeah.
So I'm aiming for 3 o'clock, so you know. So we are going to round off a bit. If you look at education in the near future, where is it heading? Where are we going? For example, what influence is artificial intelligence going to have? How important is creativity in the future when computers are able to compose music, to paint paintings, for example?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons why you always want to be in an occupation where there's something that's a step ahead of the computers. Um, I, so far as I know, and I have no expertise in artificial intelligence. Computers have been very good at convergent things. Like they can play chess better than experts, or even Go better than
Yes.
experts. I don't know that one would say that computers are better than at composing music or at doing art than our most creative composers or artists, because they're still, they're determined by their programmers. I mean, the programmers create the programming. In terms of where the future is going, I don't know. I don't see much changing. It's certainly not going to change under Trump or get any better. I don't think he pays a lot of attention to education. And maybe then if a Democrat, at least here, is elected next time, things will get better. But I don't think the problem is a U.S. problem. It's a worldwide problem that people's critical thinking, IQs increased tremendously in the 20th century, according to
Two
James Smith,
standard
30
deviations.
points. Yeah, 30 points. And yet, as critical thinkers,
Yeah.
people definitely don't seem any better whatsoever than they used to be. So if you needed any demonstration, hard empirical scientific demonstration of how little IQ matters, the Flynn effect, the increase of IQ's 30 points in the 20th century, is really good hard evidence that we're going down a blind alley, that we're really paying a lot of attention to skills that don't matter, because we're going back to the times of electing people who promise a lot, and what they deliver is a government that's very hard to get rid of, and that favors uh, non-critical thinking people at the expense of those who are well educated. It's a bad situation that uh, we need better leadership and better critical thinking on our own parts to make it better.
So your ambition is maybe to design a website or to make a website so your theories become available for a broader audience. And
Yeah, I do have a website, robertjsternberg.com, but I'm talking about something that is much more oriented toward parents and educators,
yes,
that is more user friendly. And that is kind of a goal I have for the next few years,
yeah,
to try to get that going. Something that is more user friendly, because I know not everyone agrees, but I think our time is limited. The climate change reports are really pretty grim, and the rate at which proto-fascists are being elected to top leadership positions, or extreme leftists. It doesn't really matter if they're extreme right or extreme left, they're about the same. It just becomes a label. It's frightening.
um, what intrigued me was the fact that 21st century skills aren't scientifically based. It's because of some companies had the need for people with a certain skill set, and these 21st century skills entered education worldwide. And scientific theories like your theory, like Richard Ryan's theory, other theories, who are scientifically proven, who are tested, peer reviewed, they don't enter education. And
No.
I think that's because the use of social media, P21, the 21st Century Skills company, has really um, elaborate network worldwide, and you as a scientist, you do research.
Yeah.
I mean, the social media is not your
No.
core business. I
Right.
think when you make it your core business, that's my opinion, because I know the few scientists who do make it their part of their core business, like Michael Fullen, maybe you know his name.
Yeah.
They really their message really spreads worldwide. You have to
Yeah.
use Twitter, you have to use Instagram, you have to use Facebook, whether you like it or not, because all the false theories enter education as well through social media.
Yeah.
So that's what
Good
I.
point.
That's why I'm surprised that you don't have such.
I agree with you. I've come to the same conclusion. A little bit late, but
All
I
right.
agree.
So let's round off. So when you have to introduce yourself, of course you're famous in the field of psychology, but who is Mr. Sternberg outside the world of psychology? I wrote you the questions. What kind of music do you like? What else is there in your life except psychology?
Oh, I would say that at least these days, most of my life is not psychology. I have 5 children, 5 grandchildren as well, and a wonderful wife. And by far, the most important thing in my life is my family. Uh, the triplets are utterly beautiful kids. My wife is terrific and very supportive. My older children, one's a law professor at Duke with 3 kids. The other is a CEO in San Francisco with 2 kids. And I would say the number one thing in my life, way above anything else, is my family. Uh, I walk a lot. I like to walk. I like to read. Um, I am interested in clocks and things like that as sort of an avocation. But I would say that by far the most important thing to me is bringing up my kids, and they've done well. Sarah just got tenure at Duke, and Seth is, as I said, CEO of Honor
Yeah,
Healthcare,
yeah.
and the triplets are 7 and need guidance from Karen and me bringing them up. And I'm I'm planning to take up the cello again. I used to play the cello, but haven't played it so much in recent years.
What kind of
Uh,
music?
so that's another thing.
What kind of music do you like?
Um, I like. I mean, what I listen to is, like many people, I am taken by the music I grew up with from the 60s and 70s. But I really like Baroque music and romantic period. I like very much. So I would say that my favorite of the class is Baroque and
Bach.
romantic and music from when I was growing up.
Nice. Um, so my last question is: what does your future look like? What's next for you?
I think that right now, I have some books coming out, but the most important thing to me is this idea about websites. I want to do one on love, which I'm working on, and one on successful intelligence, which I'm working on, because I came to sort of the same conclusion that you just talked about, that I kind of knew this after I do it when I left administration, that as an academic, you can't really change much. And I'm sort of reaching the point where if I don't have some success soon, I'll have run out of time.
Yeah.
So I need to
Yeah.
redefine myself. I have to creatively redefine myself, define myself, so to speak, and take the route you're talking about, and that is try through the internet to achieve more success than I have through conventional articles and
Yes.
books, because that's sure not going anywhere, at least hasn't so far. And it's time for a change.
Do you know about the project that's going on in the Netherlands with your
I'm
theory?
sorry.
Do you know about the projects that are going on in the Netherlands?
I don't know which projects you're referring
Now,
to.
it's the Radboud University is doing 2 projects for 9 and 10 year olds, and they have
I will.
to.
No.
They're assessing those kids, and my son as well, whether they are more using their creativity or wisdom. There's no wisdom, practical skills, or analytical skills. I
Well,
believe.
good. That's
So,
great.
but you're not involved in any way.
No.
I always ask my interviewees, who should I interview next? Who inspires you a lot? Maybe in the world of psychology, maybe outside the world of psychology.
Who should you interview next? I think that Scott Lilienfeld at Emory is a really interesting thinker. Jonathan Haidt at NYU, or Haidt, I'm not sure, maybe it's pronounced Haidt, is an interesting thinker. Roy Baumeister at Queensland is an interesting thinker. I would say those three are.
That's
really
all in the field of psychology.
Oh, outside of psychology? Have you talked to Linda Darling Hammond at Stanford? She's in education there. You mentioned Michael Fullan. He's an interesting guy. Howard Gardner is interesting. David Perkins.
I'm doing an interview with Carol Dweck as well.
Carol Dweck, yeah. Carol Dweck, but she's a psychologist.
Yeah, that's true. Well, let me end by saying many thanks. Thanks for your time. I'm going to write an article about your theory for my readers and for my viewers. The goal is to make education a fair place for everyone, more interesting, and at least it's my mission to bring in some science. So I'll keep you informed, and when the article is finished, I'll send you a copy. It's going to be in Dutch, but well, that's going to be.
Well, thanks for doing this.